My wife's friend is pregnant because of me. I never imagined I would find myself here, sitting in my car at 2 a.m., staring blankly at the deserted street outside, grappling with the chaos my life has turned into. But that's how life works, right? It hits you out of nowhere like a freight train. I suppose I should start from the beginning. How Sophie and I transformed from being that enviable couple to, well, whatever this train wreck is now. We crossed paths in our 20s, a time when I still had a full head of hair and an abundance of optimism. Sophie embodied everything I thought I wanted in a partner: intelligent, stunning, and driven. I was immersed in the IT world, while she was a teacher, brimming with energy and ambition. I admired that about her, how she tackled life head-on. We married young, maybe too young, but I was convinced we shared something extraordinary. It wasn't merely love. It was a fierce flame that felt like it would never go out. However, as they say, life has its way of surprising you. Somewhere between the sleepless nights with our 2 kids, the mounting bills, and my job draining every ounce of my energy, a shift occurred. I began to work more, striving to keep up with our financial struggles, while Sophie stepped away from teaching to stay at home with the kids. It seemed like a sensible choice. Her dream was to nurture our children, and I would take on the role of provider. But, as always, things are rarely as straightforward as they seem. I recall the first moment I sensed something was off between us. It started subtly. Sophie began to irritate me more than usual. It wasn't anything overt, just little things. The way she nagged about my late arrivals, or her passive-aggressive comments about my lack of involvement with the kids. I chalked it up to stress. Who wouldn't be overwhelmed with 2 young kids and a house to maintain? But then, the situation escalated. She began accusing me of being indifferent, of lacking emotional presence. Meanwhile, I felt like I was doing everything I could to keep our lives running smoothly. I was working long hours to ensure we could keep the roof over our heads, yet she failed to see it that way. To Sophie, I was just distant, uncaring, cold. Our arguments became about the most trivial matters. I'd come home drained after a grueling 12-hour day, and the first thing she'd do was ignite a fight about why I hadn't replied to her at lunch. Lunch? I barely had time to scarf down a meal, let alone respond to a trivial text. Yet every disagreement, every fight, seemed to drive a wedge between us. I felt like I was failing in her eyes. And to be honest, I stopped trying. Around that same time, I started spending more time with Lily, Sophie's best friend. I know how that sounds, but at the time, it was completely innocent. Lily was often around due to her close bond with Sophie, and with her own complicated relationship history, she understood my struggles. We'd chat at family events or when she came over for dinner. I found it refreshing to talk to her. She didn't judge or blame, unlike Sophie. Then Sophie announced her unexpected pregnancy. I can't quite explain it, but instead of feeling happy or thrilled, I felt trapped. The timing was utterly wrong. We were already hanging by a thread, and now we were bringing another child into the mix? But Sophie, oh, she was over the moon. It was as if she viewed the pregnancy as a magical remedy for all our issues. Suddenly, she started treating me differently, manipulating me in ways I hadn't noticed before. She'd emphasize how we needed to become a family, how I had to step up now that another baby was on the way. She threw a big celebration for the pregnancy, inviting all our friends and family over to announce the news like we'd just won the lottery. I'll never forget that day. Sophie was glowing, beaming as she made her speech, telling everyone how excited we were to expand our family. And me? I stood in the corner, a glass of whiskey in hand, smiling like an idiot, nodding along while my inside screamed. I didn't want another kid. I didn't even know if I wanted to be with her anymore. And here she was, ensuring I had no way out. I remember looking across the room and locking eyes with Lily. She gave me this small, knowing smile, as if she could see right through the facade. And maybe she could. After the party, As the guests started to leave and Sophie basked in the afterglow of her announcement, I slipped outside for a smoke. Lily followed. "You all right?" she asked, leaning against the porch railing. There was something comforting about the way she spoke, calm, understanding, no judgment. I shrugged. "Does it look like I'm all right?" She didn't push, just stood there quietly, letting the silence stretch between us. It was the first time in a long time that someone wasn't expecting anything from me. I lit another cigarette, the smoke swirling into the cold night air. "It's not what you wanted," she finally said, her voice low, almost a whisper. I shook my head. "Not even close." We stood there for a while, just two people who'd seen too much, heard too much. She didn't need to say anything more, and I didn't have the energy to explain. All I knew was that something had shifted that night. I wasn't sure what, but it was there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to take over. From that moment on, the tension between Sophie and me only escalated. Our fights became not just frequent, but downright brutal. She'd hurl anything she could find, plates, glasses, and biting remarks that stung far worse than any object ever could. She unleashed accusations that felt like daggers, and I found myself retreating into silence. Why bother fighting back? She was a tempest, wild and uncontrollable, and I was just trying to keep my head above water. And Lily? Well, let's just say that as Sophie pushed me further away, Lily became my unexpected anchor. After that party, things shifted in a way I couldn't quite articulate. The divide between Sophie and me felt like an ever-expanding abyss. But Lily? She seemed to be around more than ever, and it wasn't like we were plotting behind anyone's back. Not yet, anyway. The more Sophie withdrew, the more I gravitated toward Lily, who was suddenly the only one who truly understood me. It started innocently enough. Following our talk on the porch, Lily and I began texting more frequently. She would send me memes that made me laugh or check in on how I was holding up. At first, it was just lighthearted banter, nothing more. But as Sophie's moods grew more erratic, filled with anger and coldness, those messages became a lifeline. Lily had survived her own relationship disasters, and it was reassuring to know I wasn't entirely alone in this chaos. We began meeting for coffee during my lunch breaks. It was nothing scandalous, just two friends sharing their lives. I'd spill my frustrations about Sophie, and Lily would listen intently, offering her usual calm advice. She never overtly took sides, but I could see the concern reflected in her eyes whenever I recounted the latest episode of our unraveling marriage. "I honestly don't know how you handle this, Ryan," she remarked one afternoon, swirling sugar into her coffee. "It feels like you're drowning in her demands." Leaning back, I let out a heavy sigh. I barely recognize her anymore. She's not the person I fell in love with. Lily frowned, a look of contemplation washing over her face. For a moment, it seemed she was wrestling with whether to say something she was holding back. Finally, she broke the silence. "Have you ever considered that maybe, just maybe, something deeper is happening with her?" I raised an eyebrow in skepticism. "What do you mean?" She paused, choosing her words with care. "I don't know. It's just that I've noticed she's been acting strangely. More secretive. Have you picked up on that?" I shrugged, trying to dismiss it. She's been a total nightmare. Yeah, but I figured it was just the pregnancy messing with her hormones. Lily fixed me with a steady gaze, taking a sip of her coffee. "Ryan, it's more than that. She's been disappearing more often, hasn't she? Staying out late? Meeting new people." That hit me harder than I expected. Lily was onto something. Sophie had been coming home later and later, offering vague excuses about catching up with old friends or needing some time alone to think. I had noticed, of course, but I was so consumed with surviving the daily drama that I hadn't really questioned it. "You think she's cheating on me?" I asked, my voice hollow, as if I couldn't even wrap my head around the idea. "I'm not saying that for sure, Ryan. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but something feels off. I've seen this kind of behavior before, and I just want you to be aware." At first, I laughed it off. Sophie? Cheating on me? No way. She was too wrapped up in using this pregnancy as a weapon against me. Why would she risk everything like that? But once Lily planted that seed of doubt, I couldn't shake it. I began to pay attention to the little things, the details I had overlooked. Sophie would come home late, claiming she had been out with friends I'd never met. She was glued to her phone, always angling the screen away from me whenever I walked by. The gnawing feeling in my gut twisted tighter every time she left the house without a solid explanation. I wanted to confront her, to call her out on her deception, but I lacked the evidence. And with Sophie, I knew better than to pick a fight without solid proof. She could twist my words like a lawyer in a courtroom, ready to make me the villain. Meanwhile, my connection with Lily deepened. She became my sanctuary, the one person who truly listened instead of tearing me apart. We started meeting more frequently, sometimes after work, sometimes on the weekends when Sophie took the kids to her parents' house. One evening, after a particularly brutal confrontation with Sophie, I found myself calling Lily, needing a sounding board. I had just come home to find Sophie already asleep, likely worn out from whatever battle she had won this time. Lily suggested I come over. It wasn't anything new. We met up plenty of times, but that night felt different. When I arrived at her place, she poured me a drink, and we settled into the couch. The air felt charged between us, heavy with unspoken emotions. I recounted the argument, detailing how Sophie had accused me of being indifferent, checked out, and a terrible father. The same old litany of insults. Ryan, you know none of that is true, right? Lily said, her voice gentle yet firm. Yeah, I know, but it doesn't stop her from saying it. She sighed, her eyes filled with understanding. You deserve so much better than this. For a moment, we sat there in silence, and I felt a shift in the air. I'm not sure who leaned in first, but suddenly, our lips met in a kiss that caught us both off guard. It wasn't planned or premeditated, it just happened. And for the first time in ages, it felt liberating. It was as if all the weight and chaos from my life with Sophie melted away, and I could finally breathe again. That night with Lily marked the beginning of something I hadn't realized I desperately needed. It wasn't just about the physical connection, though that played a significant role. It was the emotional bond. Lily made me feel valued, as if I truly mattered. In that moment, she embodied everything Sophie had stopped being. But the euphoria was fleeting. As blissful as my time with Lily was, the storm with Sophie continued to rage. I couldn't shake the feeling that her erratic behavior stemmed from something deeper than mere stress. I began to observe her more closely, watching her when she thought I wasn't paying attention. She was glued to her phone, texting incessantly, a smile often creeping on her face as she read whatever was on the screen. It drove me mad. Then one night, I stumbled upon the evidence I had been dreading. We had yet another fight, over something trivial, as usual. Sophie stormed off to bed, leaving me simmering in the living room. I needed a drink to calm my frazzled nerves. As I walked into the kitchen, I spotted her phone lying on the counter, its screen illuminating a message. I didn't want to be that guy. The one who rummages through his wife's phone like a paranoid, jealous fool. But something inside me snapped. I picked it up, and there it was, messages from a number I didn't recognize, filled with intimate words that twisted my stomach into knots. There was no denying it. She was seeing someone else. It felt like the ground had fallen away beneath me. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages, each one confirming what I had been trying to avoid for weeks. Sophie was cheating, and she wasn't even attempting to hide it. The next day, when I confronted her, she didn't even attempt to deny it. She looked at me with that icy, indifferent gaze she had mastered over the past few months. What did you expect, Ryan? You've been absent for months, she replied, as if her infidelity were justified. I could barely muster the words. How long has this been going on? Long enough, she stated flatly. And just like that, understood our marriage was finished. The worst part? I wasn't even shocked. I had been clinging to a relationship that had long since died, hoping for some miracle of revival. But standing there amid the ruins of what we had built, I realized there was no path back. I was done. Now I had to figure out my next steps. In the days that followed, I struggled to pull myself together after uncovering those messages. I wandered the house in a daze, replaying every moment in my mind, trying to pinpoint where everything had gone awry. The kids remained blissfully unaware, while Sophie acted as though nothing had changed, as if she hadn't just shattered the remnants of our marriage. But I couldn't let it go. Every glance at her sent a wave of anger boiling just beneath the surface. I had to confront her, even though I knew how it would unfold. Sophie always had a knack for flipping the script and making me the villain. But this time I wouldn't back down. I couldn't. So, one evening after the kids were tucked in bed, I summoned the courage to sit her down in the kitchen. My hands quaked as I lit a cigarette, trying to find my footing. She shot me an annoyed look, clearly irritated that I was smoking indoors. It was just one more thing she could use against me, but tonight I didn't care. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice low, but the tension was palpable. Sophie crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "About what?" "About you. About the things you've been doing behind my back." For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes, or perhaps just the realization that I was onto her. But she quickly masked it with her usual indifference. "What are you talking about, Ryan?" I took a deep drag from my cigarette, the smoke swirling between us like a barrier I wished I could hide behind. "Don't play dumb, Sophie. I saw the messages. I know you're seeing someone else." She sighed, rolling her eyes as if I were being dramatic. "Oh, here we go. You're just going to start accusing me? So original, Ryan." "I'm not accusing you. I'm telling you what I know." I shot back, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "You've been lying to me for God knows how long, and I'm done pretending everything is okay." She stared at me for a long moment before letting out a bitter laugh. "You want to talk about lying? About pretending everything is fine? You've been checked out for months, Ryan. You don't even care anymore." There was the same tired argument she always threw my way. I had stopped caring? That was rich, considering she was the one sneaking around behind my back. "This isn't about me not caring," I said, my voice rising. "This is about you cheating on me, lying to my face every single day. Don't you dare twist this around." Sophie stood up, pacing the kitchen like a predator, sizing up its prey. "You know what? I'm not even surprised. You've always been so paranoid and controlling. It's no wonder I had to find someone else. At least he listens to me. Unlike you." I could hardly believe the words spilling from her lips. She was justifying her betrayal, as if I had somehow forced her into someone else's arms. My heart raced in my chest as I fought to keep my composure. "This is absurd, Sophie, and you know it. You made your choice, and now you have to deal with the consequences." She halted her pacing and faced me, her eyes as cold as ice. "You really think you can just walk away from this? From us? Pathetic, Ryan. If you leave, I'll take the kids and you won't see them again. You'll be left with nothing." That struck me like a punch to the gut. I had always known she could be vindictive, but this was a new low. "You can't do that," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. She smiled, a cruel twist of her lips. "Watch me." I stood there, the weight of her words crashing over me like a tidal wave. She had me cornered. No matter what I did, she was determined to ensure I paid the price. It wasn't about the kids, it was about control. It was her way of winning, regardless of the cost. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Sophie slept next to me, I felt suffocated, drowning in the reality of my situation. I needed an escape, something, anything to end this nightmare. That's when my thoughts turned to Lily. We had been spending more time together, and it was evolving beyond mere friendship. There was a genuine connection between us, one that Sophie had long since destroyed. Lily understood me in ways that Sophie never could. I found myself thinking about her more often, how she made me feel human again instead of just a punching bag for Sophie's frustrations. The next day, I met Lily at our usual cafe. We sat by the window, the afternoon sun pouring in, but there was an undeniable tension hanging in the air. I hadn't yet told her about the confrontation with Sophie. I wasn't sure how to approach it. "Is everything okay?" Lily asked, her voice soft, her hand brushing against mine on the table. I nodded, but it felt like a lie. "Not really. I confronted her last night. She denied everything, of course, and then threatened to take the kids if I left." Lily's eyes widened with concern. "She said that." "Yeah. She knows she's got me trapped. I can't just walk away." We fell into silence, the weight of the situation heavy between us. Finally, Lily broke the quiet. "You deserve better than this, Ryan." Her words hit me hard, not because they were new, but because I finally believed them. I deserved better. I couldn't continue living like this, with Sophie controlling every aspect of my life and threatening to tear me apart if I even considered leaving. As the weeks passed, Lily and I grew closer. Our weekends together turned into deep conversations about our dreams, our pasts, and the lives we wished we could have. I hadn't felt this connected to anyone in years. It was easy with her, simple. She didn't judge me or remind me of my failures. She just understood. One evening, after yet another exhausting day with Sophie, I met Lily at a park near her home. We strolled in silence for a while, savoring the tranquility. Eventually, we found a bench and settled down, watching the sunset cast soft hues of pink and orange across the sky. "I've been thinking," I said, breaking the silence. "Maybe I should just leave, take the kids and go. I can't keep doing this." Lily turned to me, her expression soft yet serious. "You don't have to stay with her, Ryan. You deserve to be happy." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I sensed a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could escape this. Perhaps there was a way out. Before I knew it, we were kissing. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was slow, deliberate, like we both understood what was unfolding but wanted to savor the moment. We lingered there, enveloped in each other's presence, finally releasing all the tension that had built up between us. Later that night, I found myself back at her place. We didn't need to talk much. Our connection transcended words. It felt as if she could peer into my soul, understanding everything I felt without needing explanations. We ended up tangled together in her bed, and for the first time in months, I felt free. Being with Lily was about more than just physical intimacy, although that was undeniably a part of it. It was about reclaiming my sense of self-worth, realizing I wasn't just a victim of Sophie's manipulation. With Lily, I could be authentically me. But as much as I wanted to stay in that blissful moment forever, reality loomed over me back home. Sophie was still there, still ready to tear me apart if I made any moves. I knew the hardest part was yet to come. When Sophie discovered I was serious about leaving, everything escalated. She transformed from cold indifference to all-out warfare. There was no hesitation, no thought of reconciliation, just pure, calculated destruction. Her first move? Filing for child support, as if the ink on the divorce papers had already dried. It wasn't about the money. I would have provided for my kids regardless. No, this was about power, about control. Sophie was weaving her narrative of victimhood, portraying herself as the poor, abandoned wife left alone with 2 kids and another on the way. And she was damn good at it. Whispers started circulating immediately among her friends, the neighbors, even our family. She painted the picture that I had left her high and dry while she carried our unborn child. She knew exactly how to twist the knife. A few days after Sophie filed, my lawyer called. "Ryan, we need to talk," he said, his tone serious. "She's coming after you for child support. We need to gather as much evidence as possible." That's when it hit me. a chilling realization that there was a real chance this child might not even be mine. The more I considered it, the more convinced I became that the timing just didn't add up. I hadn't been intimate with Sophie around the time she could have conceived. And if she was cheating, who knew who the father really was? Lily and I spent countless nights poring over everything. I confided in her about Sophie's threats and manipulations, expressing my doubts about the child's paternity. Lily was the only person who knew the full extent of Sophie's infidelity. She had seen it firsthand, how Sophie would disappear, meet strange men, and flirt shamelessly at parties. Lily was resolute in her support, eager to help me fight back. But I knew this was no small feat. Sophie was cunning, and she had everyone else wrapped around her finger. We needed proof. Gathering evidence proved to be more challenging than I had anticipated. Sophie was smart, covering her tracks at every turn. But Lily, being so close to her, had witnessed enough to raise serious red flags. She began meticulously documenting every suspicious incident, dates, names, locations. It felt like we were building a case against a criminal, but in many ways, that's exactly what this was. Sophie, of course, wasn't making it easy. Every interaction was fraught with tension, laced with veiled threats and passive-aggressive comments. She played the victim role flawlessly whenever the kids were around, ensuring they overheard her dramatics about how I was abandoning them. It was nauseating, but I knew better than to engage in front of them. I had to maintain my composure, even as anger simmered just below the surface. And then there was Lily. The more time I spent with her, the more I recognized how different my life could be. She became my sanctuary, the one person who made me feel sane amid the chaos. Yet, guilt gnawed at me. Was it right to pursue a relationship with her, while everything with Sophie remained unresolved? Was I merely using Lily as a means to escape the wreckage of my life? The internal struggle tormented me. Part of me longed to walk away from it all. Sophie, the legal battles, the constant manipulation, and start anew with Lily. But another part of me grappled with the knowledge that I couldn't abandon my kids. No matter what transpired between Sophie and me, they remained my responsibility. And the nagging question lingered. What if the child truly was mine? I couldn't move forward without knowing the truth. The court hearings were torture. Sophie arrived each time looking every bit the wronged wife, her belly now visibly rounded with pregnancy. She played her part to perfection, tearing up at all the right moments, portraying me as the unfeeling jerk who had left her in her time of need. I wanted to scream every time she opened her mouth, to rise and tell the court the truth about the person she had become. But I knew better. Emotional outbursts would only play into her hands. I had to remain composed, sticking to the facts. Fortunately, my lawyer was a shark. He began presenting our evidence, illustrating that Sophie had been unfaithful and that her timeline didn't add up. The moment we mentioned the DNA test, Sophie's demeanor shifted drastically. She went from confident to defensive in seconds. "I don't think that's necessary," she argued, trying to maintain her facade of composure. My lawyer pressed on. "Mr. Ryan has every right to know if the child is his. If you have nothing to hide, you should have no issue with the test." Sophie shot me a glare that could cut glass. I knew she was furious. She thought she could control every aspect of this situation, but this was something she couldn't manipulate. If the test proved the child wasn't mine, her entire narrative would crumble. She'd lose sympathy from the court, the financial support, everything. Still, she fought it tooth and nail, trying to appeal to the judge by claiming how invasive and unnecessary the test was, how it would cause her undue stress during her pregnancy. But I stood my ground. I had to know the truth. I wouldn't allow her to manipulate me any longer. The judge finally ruled in my favor. The DNA test would be conducted after the baby was born. Sophie stormed out of the courtroom that day, her face twisted in rage, leaving me behind with a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I was on the verge of reclaiming my life. Yet even with that victory, I found myself at a crossroads. Lily was becoming increasingly significant to me with each passing day. Our relationship had evolved. We weren't just meeting for coffee anymore. We spent quality time together, dinners, late-night talks, even spontaneous trips out of town when I needed to clear my head. She was the only person who made me feel valued, like I wasn't merely a pawn in Sophie's manipulative game. And yes, the physical chemistry between us had intensified. We weren't sneaking around, but we weren't just friends anymore. One evening, after a grueling day in court, I found myself at Lily's place. She greeted me with a warm smile and an embrace, and I collapsed into her arms. We didn't talk much at first. She simply held me, allowing me to unwind. We cooked dinner together, poured glasses of wine, and for a few hours, I forgot about the chaos that defined my life. As the night wore on, we sat together on her couch, the conversation gradually slowing as the wine made everything feel softer around the edges. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I recognized how much she meant to me. She wasn't just an escape from my miserable marriage. She was someone I genuinely cared for. Without thinking, I reached out and took her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she inched closer, resting her head on my shoulder. The silence between us was comfortable, yet charged with an unspoken tension, an acknowledgement of feelings we hadn't fully confronted. And then, without a word, our lips met. The kiss wasn't hurried or frantic. It was slow and deliberate. It felt profoundly different from anything I had experienced with Sophie. With Lily, there was no anger, no manipulation, just an authentic connection. One moment led to another, and soon we were lost in each other, our bodies moving together in a harmony that made everything else fade into the background. That night with Lily marked a shift, a departure from all the previous encounters we'd shared. It wasn't merely an escape from Sophie. It was about finding someone who genuinely saw me, flaws and all. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I might not be completely broken after all. But the reality loomed overhead. The DNA test hung like a cloud over everything, and I knew that whatever the outcome, it would define the next chapter of my life. If the child was mine, I'd have to figure out how to deal with Sophie for the foreseeable future. But if it wasn't, well, then I would finally be free. I just hoped I was prepared for whatever truth awaited me. The day of the test results felt like an eternity. I had been running on fumes for weeks, barely surviving the chaos of court battles, work, and the constant mental warfare with Sophie. Today was the day I would finally learn if the child she was carrying was mine, or if I had been the victim of an elaborate deception. My stomach twisted into knots as I sat in the sterile clinic lobby, tapping my foot anxiously against the linoleum floor. Lily had offered to accompany me, but I insisted I needed to face this alone. As supportive as she had been through everything, I had to confront this reality by myself. I couldn't rely on her forever, especially for something so monumental. When the nurse finally called my name, I felt as if my legs were lead weights as I stood up. The walk to the back office blurred by, my mind racing with every possible scenario. Then I found myself seated across from a doctor in a white coat, who held an envelope that could change my life forever. His words came out slowly, almost methodically. "Ryan, the DNA test results are in, and the child is not biologically yours." I was engulfed by a whirlwind of emotions. Part of me wanted to collapse with relief, while another part seethed with rage. Sophie had been lying to me for months, manipulating my feelings, using the pregnancy as a weapon, all while knowing the child wasn't mine. The truth struck me hard, but it also felt like a liberation. It was over. I was free. I left that clinic feeling lighter than I had in years. The weight that had suffocated me was gone. This child wasn't mine. I didn't owe Sophie anything anymore. She couldn't control me, couldn't use the baby as a leverage to keep me chained to her. I was finally, gloriously free. The first person I called was Lily. I didn't even need to say the words. She could hear it in my voice. "So, it's done?" she asked, her tone laced with cautious optimism. "Yeah," I replied, releasing a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "It's done. The baby isn't mine." There was a pause before Lily spoke again, her voice softer this time. "Ryan, I'm so happy for you. You can finally move on." Move on. The word struck me harder than I anticipated. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle or getting back at Sophie. This was about reclaiming my life. And for the first time, I genuinely believed I could. I wasn't going to keep this a secret. Sophie had spent months weaving her web of lies, convincing everyone around us that I was the villain, the heartless husband abandoning his pregnant wife. Now that I had the truth, I wasn't going to let her continue playing the victim. I called a few close friends and family members first, informing them of what had transpired. I kept it straightforward, no embellishments, no emotional outbursts. The DNA test confirmed the child isn't mine. Sophie's been lying this whole time. Reactions varied. Some were shocked, others angry on my behalf. But one thing was clear. Everyone felt a sense of betrayal. Sophie had manipulated not just me, but everyone around her. She had constructed this image of a wronged woman. And now that the truth was out, that facade was about to shatter. I didn't stop there. I decided to invite a group of friends and acquaintances over for a casual gathering at the house. The very place where Sophie and I had once played the part of the perfect couple. It felt fitting that this would be the setting for revealing her betrayal. Once everyone had gathered, I stood before them and laid it all out. "I've been keeping quiet about a lot of things, but you all deserve to know the truth. Sophie has been unfaithful for months, and the child she's carrying, it's not mine." Gasps and murmurs of disbelief filled the room. A few people exchanged furtive glances, unsure how to react. But I wasn't seeking sympathy. I simply wanted the truth to be laid bare. I was done hiding, done letting Sophie dictate the story. Word spread quickly, much faster than I had anticipated. Within days, the carefully constructed facade of Sophie's life began to crumble. Friends who had rallied around her during her pregnancy started to pull away. Neighbors who had once whispered about me were now talking about her, shaking their heads in disapproval. The social network she had relied on for so long was disintegrating right before her eyes. The next time we met to exchange the kids, I could see the panic etched on her face. She was losing her grip, and she knew it. Her voice, typically so sharp and commanding, had lost its edge, becoming softer, almost pleading. "Ryan, can we talk about this? Please." Once I might have given in, sitting down to listen to her excuses. But not anymore. "What's there to discuss, Sophie? You lied. You used this pregnancy as a weapon against me. And now everyone knows the truth." Her eyes flashed with indignation. "You didn't have to humiliate me like this." I shrugged. "You did that to yourself." Of course, she tried to justify her actions. She claimed she was lonely, that I had pushed her away, that the affair had simply happened. But no one was buying it anymore. The truth was out, and she had run out of defenses. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a certain satisfaction watching her world unravel. For too long, she had controlled everything. How others perceived me, how I perceived myself. But now, she was the one on the outside while I held the power. There was a poetic justice in that. Yet, not everything felt like a victory. The hardest part of this upheaval was the kids. They didn't understand what was happening, why mommy and daddy were suddenly living apart, or why everyone seemed so angry all the time. I did my best to shield them from the chaos, but there were moments when the tension slipped through, and I could see the confusion in their eyes. That broke my heart. I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for them. I kept their routines intact, ensured they had playdates, and spent quality time with them. But in those quiet moments, I could sense their unease. They knew something was wrong, even if they couldn't articulate it. Despite her faults, I knew Sophie loved the kids. But in the process of dismantling our marriage, she had lost something crucial in her relationship with them. Her selfishness and deceit had taken a toll. They could feel the shift, even if they didn't understand it completely. In the end, Sophie attempted to claw back some semblance of her former life. She reached out to a few mutual friends, trying to explain herself and win back their sympathy. But it was too late. No one wanted to hear her excuses anymore. They had witnessed her true self, and there was no going back from that. As for me, I was finally free. Free from Sophie's manipulation and the suffocating weight of a relationship that had become unbearable. I spent more time with Lily, and we grew closer with each passing day. She became my lifeline, my hope, the one who had stood by me through the darkest moments. We didn't rush into anything. We took our time, savoring our moments together, discussing our dreams for the future. There was a sense of peace between us, a mutual understanding that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope. Hope that perhaps, just perhaps, things would turn out all right. The weeks following the revelation felt like stepping into a brand new world, one where the air felt lighter and the ground beneath my feet steadier. The war with Sophie, the endless manipulation, the toxic atmosphere, it was all behind me now. And with that chapter closed, a new one was beginning, one I hadn't anticipated but had been yearning for all my life. Lily and I took things slowly, both understanding the importance of building something genuine and lasting rather than rushing into a relationship simply because it felt like the right next step. Yet, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, it became clear that we weren't just passing time. We were creating a life together, something solid and real. We spent our weekends mapping out our future, discussing where we'd live, the adventures we'd embark on, and how we'd weave our lives together into something fresh and fulfilling. It wasn't just about escaping the ruins of my old life anymore. With Lily, I felt like I was actually constructing something meaningful, something to be proud of. She brought out the best in me. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't merely surviving. I was truly living. With Lily by my side, I began to believe that I was capable of more than I had ever given myself credit for. Her faith in me reignited a spark of self-belief that I thought had long been extinguished. One evening, after dinner at our favorite little Italian restaurant, Lily looked at me, her eyes sparkling in a way that made my heart swell. She seemed unusually nervous, a departure from her usual confidence. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I set my wine glass down, suddenly on high alert. "What is it?" She hesitated for a moment. Then the words spilled out. "I'm pregnant." It took a second for the news to register. Pregnant. Lily was pregnant. I stared at her, my mind racing, my heart doing flips in my chest. I wasn't sure how to react at first. Then I noticed the uncertainty in her eyes, as if she feared my response. And that's when it dawned on me. This was entirely different from last time. This wasn't Sophie using a pregnancy as a weapon to control me. This was something genuine, something I actually wanted. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "Lily, that's incredible." Her smile lit up the room, flooding my heart with warmth. In that moment, I experienced a joy I hadn't felt in years. I was going to be a father again, but this time, it was on my terms, with someone who loved me for who I was, not for what I could provide. We spent time discussing what this meant for us, how we would navigate this new chapter together. For the first time in ages, I didn't feel overwhelmed by the future. I wasn't scared or anxious. I felt ready. Ready to step up, to be the father this child deserved. Ready to build a family with Lily, to give this baby everything I hadn't been able to provide my other kids during the turmoil with Sophie. In the weeks that followed, Lily and I dove into real planning. We explored houses together, looking for a fresh start outside the city, far removed from the painful memories of our past. It felt surreal, like I had been granted a second chance at life, love, and happiness. I never thought I would find myself in this position, especially after all that had happened with Sophie. I had been so broken, so lost, and yet here I was, with a woman who truly saw me, who understood me, and who wanted to create a life together. Lily's pregnancy infused my life with purpose. The ultrasound appointments, the baby name discussions, the way she would gently rest her hand on her belly with a smile that radiated love, it all felt like a dream I never wanted to wake from. The best part? I wasn't alone in this. Lily and I were partners, tackling everything as a team. We shared our fears, hopes, and aspirations for the future. It wasn't always easy. The legal battles with Sophie still lingered, casting shadows over our lives. But no matter how challenging things became, I knew we would face it together. As the months rolled on, things with Sophie began to settle. She still attempted to regain some semblance of control, but with the truth out, her grip on me had slipped. The court ruled in my favor regarding child support. After all, the child wasn't mine, and she couldn't keep pretending otherwise. Her social circle had mostly abandoned her, and the image she had carefully cultivated was in tatters. There were still tense moments, particularly when it came to co-parenting. I was determined to be there for my kids, reassuring them that I would never abandon them. As difficult as it was, I couldn't let my anger at Sophie color the way I treated them. They were innocent in all of this. Despite the challenges, life was finally beginning to make sense again. I was moving forward, not merely surviving, but genuinely living. Lily and I spent our weekends preparing for the baby, setting up the nursery, picking out clothes, and dreaming about our future. Each time I looked at her, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, as if I had received a gift I didn't deserve. I had once doubted I would find happiness again, but here it was, blossoming before me, growing stronger with each passing day. When Lily's due date finally arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. I paced the hospital hallway, my hands trembling and my mind racing with every conceivable scenario. But when I finally held our baby in my arms, everything else faded away. In that moment, nothing mattered. Not the past, not the pain, not the betrayals. All that mattered was this tiny, perfect life that Lily and I had brought into the world. Looking down at my son, I felt a profound shift within me. This was my second chance, not just at being a father, but at becoming the kind of man I had always aspired to be. The kind of man Lily believed I could be. As I watched Lily cradle our son, her eyes filled with love and exhaustion, it struck me. Despite everything, the hardships, the betrayals, the endless struggles, my life had gained new meaning. I wasn't just escaping my past anymore. I was building a future, one filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities. I knew challenges would still arise. Life wouldn't suddenly be perfect, and the scars from my marriage to Sophie would never fully heal. But I was no longer defined by that pain. I was no longer trapped by the mistakes of my past. With Lily by my side and our son in my arms, I felt ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in a long while, I experienced something I thought I had lost forever: